Today, we are going to be talking about 8 quarterbacks slash tight ends that I will be betting the farm on. But of course, I don't really have a farm. I just have a lot of fantasy football funds that I spend on drafts every year, and I will be spending cold hard cash drafting these players in 2025. So without further ado, let's get started and let's begin with JJ McCarthy. I believe in JJ McCarthy as a prospect, but more importantly, I believe in Kevin O'Connell. Since he took over the team in 2022, O'Connell's teams have ranked number 6 in yards per game, number 8 in points scored per game in 2022. In 2023, when Kirk Cousins was hurt, the offense took a little bit of a dip, number 11 in yards per game, number 22 in points per game. But in 2024, they got right up back on the horse with Sam Darnold, of all people, and ranked number 12 in yards per game and number 9 in points per game. And in the past, Kevin O'Connell has produced some really good quarterback finishes for fantasy football. In 2022, Kirk Cousins ranked as the quarterback 13 in fantasy points per game with 18 fantasy points per game. And in 2023, if Kirk Cousins wouldn't have got hurt, he was on a torrid pace. He finished that season as the quarterback 7 in fantasy points per game, 19.3 fantasy points per game in 8 games played. And in 2024, Sam Darnold was actually very useful for fantasy football. He ranked as the quarterback 11 in fantasy points per game. And one could argue that JJ McCarthy is actually the most talented quarterback that Kevin O'Connell has ever had to work with as the head coach for the Minnesota Vikings. And because of an injury, McCarthy had time to sit and learn while Sam Darnold took snaps last season. And the cast of weapons doesn't hurt. You all know the names, but it helps when you have Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hockenson as pass catchers, and veterans like Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason in the backfield. The Vikings also invested heavily into the offensive line this season. They signed offensive guard Will Fries, center Ryan Kelly, and they drafted Donovan Jackson with their first-round pick. That's 3 new starters along the interior of the offensive line to protect JJ McCarthy. And after ranking number 18th, according to PFF last season, it wouldn't be a surprise to me to see the Vikings offensive line take a leap, maybe become average to slightly above average, maybe even close in on the top 10 as we close out the 2025 season. That would not shock me at all. Let's shift to a quarterback, and I'll admit it, I've tried to quit Kyler Murray, but just when I thought I was out, the stats just keep pulling me back in. For starters, when I sat down to do my research, I thought for sure I would find that Kyler Murray had a disappointing season last year. I mean, after all, the team's first-round pick, Marvin Harrison Jr., wasn't very good at all, and the team stalled on a lot of their drives, or at least it seemed like it to me. Murray actually finishes the quarterback 10 overall last season and the quarterback 12 in fantasy points per game. That's not bad. It's not great, but it's not bad either. He also ranked number 8 in carries amongst quarterbacks with 78 and ranked number 4 amongst quarterbacks in rushing yards with 572. In fact, since he entered the NFL in 2019, Kyler Murray has never rushed for fewer than 423 yards and has never had fewer than 78 rushing attempts when playing at least 14 games or more. In every single season he's played at least 14 games, Kyler Murray has put up no fewer than 4 rushing touchdowns each and every season. Well, why am I telling you this? Because while we all know rushing quarterbacks are valuable, Kyler Murray possesses the rushing upside without the cost that comes with one of the elite options. In fact, Kyler Murray has never finished a season with fewer than 18.1 fantasy points scored per game. And that was last season. If you want to tell me Kyler Murray is too small, I've heard that before, or he doesn't run enough, he put up his lowest number of rushing attempts last season, as we said, to be successful in the NFL and for fantasy, I would respectfully disagree with that based on the numbers that we just read out here. The offense is also mostly unchanged in terms of personnel and coaching staff. Trey McBride, Marvin Harris, and James Conner are all back, and the offensive coordinator's back too. And the offensive line played a lot better as the season went on. All of it leads me to believe that Kyler Murray's floor is exactly what it has been his entire career. And what it was last season was quarterback 11, quarterback 12 in fantasy points per game, with the upside of finishing as a top 8 to even top 6 or top 5 fantasy quarterback. Let's talk about Dak Prescott. We forget about the upside that comes with Dak Prescott. Let's not forget that Prescott finished as a top 5 fantasy quarterback twice in his career, has finished as a top 10 fantasy quarterback 4 times. And in 2020, Prescott averaged 27.9 fantasy points per game through 5 games. He was on a torrid pace that year. He doesn't have the upside from a rushing perspective that he used to have, but in his last full season in 2023, he ranked number 4 in pass attempts, number 3 in passing yards, number 1 in passing touchdowns, number 1 in money throws, number 2 in true passer rating, and number 2 in QBR. He also ranked number 11 in rush attempts that season, and the Cowboys drafted an offensive guard in Tyler Booker, and they added George Pickens to their wide receiver room. They also don't have much in the way of running backs unless you really like Javonte Williams or Jaden Blue, but my guess is those guys aren't going to be bell cow running backs in the offense. So this is likely a team that's going to be dependent on their passing attack in order to move the ball. And last season, Dallas ranked number 31 in points allowed per game, 27.5 points allowed per game, and they likely won't be much better in 2025. You know what that means. That means shootouts, and we want players who are going to have to keep scoring to keep up with other teams, especially in that division. Dak Prescott is going to have to throw the ball a lot in 2025, and drafting him would be a really smart move in fantasy football. Let's talk about perhaps my favorite quarterback to draft, and that would be Drake Maye. Drake Maye last season showed why he might be one of the next top producers at the quarterback position. Maye played in 10 games where he attempted 20 passes or more, and in those games, Maye averaged 17.4 fantasy points per game. This ranked number 13 amongst all quarterbacks, ranked right next to Jordan Love. Let's not forget, though, that the Patriots did not have much in the way of wide receivers. Hunter Henry was the leading target earner in the offense, and the offensive line was god-awful. It ranked number 32, according to PFF, at the end of last season, dead last in the NFL. This was not a great situation for a rookie quarterback to be thrown into, and the kicker is Gerard Mayo was fired as the head coach after just one season. The Patriots hired Mike Vrabel as the head coach and Josh McDaniels as the offensive coordinator this season. Those are two competent coaches in my estimation. The Patriots also brought in 4 new offensive linemen in the offseason. They signed center Garrett Bradbury, right tackle Morgan Moses, and they drafted left tackle Will Campbell and center Jared Wilson. This unit likely won't be among the elite units in the NFL, but it has the chance of being average and certainly much better than it was in 2024. The Pats also added Stephon Diggs in free agency, and while he might not be what he once was, he should still be a security blanket for Drake Maye over the middle of the field. The Patriots also drafted Kyle Williams as well, who was highly touted coming into the NFL draft. All of these improvements should help Drake Maye elevate to what he can be for fantasy football in 2025. But we haven't even talked about the best part yet. His rushing upside is just unreal. Last season, essentially playing in 10 games where he attempted 20 passes or more, as we mentioned, Maye ran the ball 54 times, which is number 16 amongst quarterbacks. He rushed for 421 rushing yards, number 9 amongst quarterbacks, and 2 touchdowns, which was number 14 amongst quarterbacks. Doesn't really look like much on the surface, but when you extrapolate that out, let's say he played a full 17-game season with that kind of rushing production each and every game or somewhere close to that, we should expect, if that happened, Maye to rush for over 700 yards on about 90-ish attempts and to score about 3 to 4 touchdowns on the ground. That would have ranked him in the top 5 amongst quarterbacks in rushing production when comparing those numbers to last year's stats. And we know this offense should be a lot better this season because it's year 2 for Drake Maye. The offensive line is going to be better. The weapons are going to be better. The coaching is going to be better. So draft him, please. I beg you. Let's shift to the tight end position and let's talk about TJ Hockenson for a minute. He's currently coming off the board as the tight end 5, 89th pick overall, according to Underdog. And in 2024, Hockenson was recovering from an injury, but in 2025, he should be good to go. Before the injury, and since 2020, Hockenson had finished no lower than tight end 7 in fantasy points per game with at least 12 games played. And over the past 2 seasons, Hockenson finished number 2 in fantasy points per game amongst tight ends with 14.6 points scored in 2023, and number 4 in fantasy points scored per game in 2022 with 12.7 fantasy points scored per game. From 2022 to 2023, Hockenson averaged 128 targets, 90.5 receptions, 937 passing yards, and 5.5 touchdowns with a 22.4% target share. He's currently, like I said, coming off the board as tight end 5, and there's every possibility that he finishes in the top 3 this season, and he's a sneaky candidate to finish as the tight end 1 in fantasy if things break right for him. And at his peak, Hockenson is a no doubt about it, set it and forget it, top 5 tight end in fantasy football. There might be some uncertainty with JJ McCarthy. Clearly, I don't think so because I'm drafting JJ McCarthy just about everywhere. But this offense is as high-powered as they come. So I believe in Kevin O'Connell to elevate the offense. And if that happens, TJ Hockenson is once again going to get a boatload of targets. Next up is going to be David Njoku. And I get it. I understand this offense isn't going to be very good, but that doesn't mean we can't use that to our advantage in fantasy football. Over the past 3 seasons, Njoku has been a consistent producer at the tight end position, no matter the quarterback. In 2022, he finishes the tight end 8 in fantasy points per game in 14 games played. In 2023, he finishes the tight end 7 in fantasy points per game, finished number 3 in targets that season amongst tight ends. And in 2024, despite playing just 11 games, he finished as the tight end 11 overall, but the tight end 4 in fantasy points per game. Njoku also finished with 97 targets, which ranked number 6 amongst tight ends. That's 8.8 targets per game. And if we extrapolate that out over a 17-game season, assuming he would stay healthy, which he, in all honesty, probably won't, but Njoku was on pace for 150 targets last year. Now, again, I understand he's missed some time with injuries over those seasons, but there hasn't been a devastating injury like a torn ACL, MCL, or an Achilles injury. Njoku has never suffered a major lower body injury in his career, at least in the pros. Now, Njoku, as we've said, is probably going to miss a few games during the season, but so what? When he's in your lineup, he has the upside to be a top 5 producer at the position, and he's currently being drafted as the tight end 10 off the board. Also, you remember that 2023 season that we talked about where David Njoku ranked number 3 amongst tight ends and targets, right? Well, for 5 of those games, Joe Flacco was the starting quarterback of the Cleveland Browns. And as you know, Joe Flacco is currently projected to be the starting quarterback for the Cleveland Browns in 2025, at least to start the season. Who knows what they're going to do once, the games start to roll on and they have the temptation to play Shedeur Sanders or whatever. But from week 13 to 17, when Joe Flacco quarterbacked the Browns in 2023, David Njoku averaged 18.2 fantasy points per game and 9 targets per game. As long as Joe Flacco's the quarterback, and I would argue no matter what really, but for sure if Joe Flacco's the quarterback, giddy up for David Njoku because he's going to be a super producer at the tight end position. Let's talk about George Kittle. Death, taxes, and George Kittle producing in fantasy football. Last season, George Kittle finished as the tight end 1 in fantasy points per game with 15.8 and the tight end 3 overall. And since 2018, Kittle has finished no lower than tight end 6 in fantasy points per game with 12.7, which was in 2023. This season, Brandon Ayuk is dealing with an injury and may not be ready for the start of the season. In fact, according to Deepak Chona on Twitter, he projects Ayuk to return sometime in October. Now, Juwan Jennings wants a new contract, so we'll see how that develops, and that leaves Ricky Pearsall, Jordan Watkins, Demarcus Robinson, and Jacob Cowing next up on the depth chart. George Kittle is my bet to lead all those players in targets and should just have an insane target share in this offense. And don't forget that this offense has consistently ranked amongst the top offenses in the league in points scored per game. In 2022, they were number 6 in points scored per game. In 2023, they were number 2 in points scored per game. Last season, yes, they ranked number 14 in points scored per game, but remember, they were without Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey is projected to be back. This is an offense that's going to score points, and George Kittle should be a main focal point of that offense. Now, if you're not into drafting tight ends early, don't worry. I have the perfect candidate for you to select very late in your fantasy drafts, and that would be Hunter Henry, who's currently coming off the board at tight end 20, 165th overall. Last season, Hunter Henry ranked number 5 amongst tight ends in targets and number 7 amongst tight ends in target share with 28.8%. Henry went on to finish as the tight end 12 and the tight end 15 in fantasy points per game, despite that volume. According to expected fantasy points per game, Henry should have finished closer to the tight end 9 with 12.2 fantasy points per game. In 10 games where Hunter Henry played with Drake Maye as the starting quarterback, Henry averaged 10.2 fantasy points per game, which does rank higher than his finish with 9.1 fantasy points per game. And while this offense did add Stephon Diggs and Kyle Williams, as we mentioned earlier, they didn't really add a tight end of note to compete with Hunter Henry for targets in the offense. New England also ranked number 25 in the NFL in pass attempts per game last season with 31.1. With Drake Maye entering year 2 and with Josh McDaniels calling the plays, I would expect the Patriots to throw more in 2025, which should make Henry's target share look all the more appetizing for fantasy football. You can't argue with the price either. As we mentioned, he's coming off the board at tight end 20, player 165. And if your strategy is to punt tight end, Hunter Henry is the perfect target in your draft. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to click the like button if you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you want more of it, and click the alarm bell to be notified of new content when it drops on the channel. Until next time, be good, everybody, and we will see you later.